But, I am so delighted to be here. I have never been in Minnesota before, and this is, I guess, Jesse Ventura country, which I'm very pleased to be in. I know he's not your governor anymore, but when Craig Lang first contacted me by email about doing this presentation today, specifically about the Stan Romanek case, he said, you know, you got a few hours to present it, and I felt like saying, have you got 3 days? I have got so much material with me today, and we will just try to cover the most important points of this. But without going into a lot of background about myself, just in short, I've been doing this kind of work since 1989 as a clinical hypnotherapist, and began working just in the field of what I thought was general hypnotherapy to help people to get well, people to make improvements in their life. And I want to say that I probably never really expected to be so fully drawn into this subject as I have been. At the heart of hypnotherapy is something that we call, well, let me back up. When you're working with someone who's got an issue, one of the things that you do is you back them up or regress them to the heart of the issue. So what was happening for me when I first began working with hypnotherapy is that I found that people who were coming in for what I thought were normal everyday problems, such as I can't sleep, I'm really bad with relationships, or I'm afraid of needles and doctors. Well, when I started regressing these people back, little did I know what I was going to find was at a large percentage of the heart of those fears. People were telling me things like, I don't know what to tell you or how to explain this, but I'm seeing little beings that are in my room. I'm being taken to a place where procedures are being done. At that point, I had been studying the field for about 5 years, but never expected to run into this many people who had non-conscious memories of abduction. And so it really got my attention. And in this field, people say there's only 2 ways of looking at it. You're either just really drawn into it and it becomes a passion, or you run screaming and kicking from the room and say, I don't want anything to do with this. So I have, though a large part of my practice is things such as past life work, working with relationships, phobias, and fears, a very large sub percentage, I guess you could say, of my work is with abductees. And today, I want to tell you about one of the most amazing cases to date that I have ever run across. I have been doing this work for years and probably regressed hundreds of clients through the years, helping them with their experiences. But truly, the Stan Romanek case is perhaps one of the quintessential cases in UFO in the UFO world that I have ever really run across. Stan's case itself is truly extraordinary, not only because of his experiences, but we've got multiple witnesses. We have video footage, which I'll be sharing with you today. We have got just lots and lots of evidence. And a lot of people, I get hundreds of emails and people who call me and tell me about their experiences, and it isn't that because they have less evidence that their case is any less important. But Stan's case is one of the cases that really does stand out because it goes on and on and on, and you've got multiple witnesses. The gentleman has had numerous times when he's had marks on his back. He's got marks in the backyard, which I'll be talking about today. He's come back with evidence in his hands, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. But truly, this case is, I'll quote Alan Hynek's, one of his old favorite statements. It's very much full of what you call high strangeness. Lots and lots of high strangeness. And I'm going to share some of the high strangeness with you today. Some of it may or may not be directly related to what you would think would be UFO experiences, but I think it's really important to look at all the stuff that's going on in someone's experiences, because many times it is linked. And there does seem to be quite a common thread of general paranormal types of events that happen with people who've had experiences. So I don't discount sharing any of that with you today. There's so much to Stan's case, literally, that I'm going to have to try to give you the most salient and poignant parts of my experience with Stan today. Before I get into the overview of Stan's case, I wanted to give you a little brief history about his younger years, because I think it's kind of important to possibly lead up to framing what's happened with him today. But when Stan was first brought to me, I was mostly focusing on the big sightings that a lot of you who do know the case have heard about or maybe seen video of, which most of which happened down in the Denver area. And at first, it kind of just appeared that Stan was in the right place at the wrong time, or depending on your viewpoint, the right place at the right time. At first I thought, I don't think this guy really has any history, perhaps, with UFO encounters. I was just basically focusing on the sightings. And in fact, it was really interesting when I first met Stan. A lot of his friends told me, before these sightings, Stan would quite frequently say, I don't believe in UFOs. He'd say, I think this is all crazy. He says, I think that's a bunch of hockey puck. And it's kind of like, be careful what you believe, because you can have your beliefs vastly changed in a moment's notice. But when I started to check in with Stan's background, as I often do with all my clients, I do a very large questionnaire on them, their family history, the whole thing. When I looked into his background, it didn't look like there were a lot of sightings or anything in particular that had happened to him. It looked again like he was just kind of in the right place to see these amazing sightings. However, there were some things that happened to Stan that were very, very curious, that I just want to give you a little background on. Like I said, as far as I know, he didn't have any encounters as a child. However, at about 6 years old, Stan recalled telling me a story about his older brothers, that they were on a paper route. Early in the morning, it was about 1968. Stan would have been about 5 years old at the time. And this happened around 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. They're delivering papers, and all of a sudden his brothers saw this giant orange UFO that was literally hovering over the local town water tower. And in fact, he said it freaked out his mother so much that they started boiling water after that, because they thought the UFO must have done something to the water. But this was a very interesting piece. Okay, when Stan's 5 years old, his brothers see a large UFO over the local water tower. What does that mean? Not necessarily anything. But then, when we were working in hypnosis as well as taking a history on him, he reported that there was a very strange woman that seemed to come into his life at 3 different times in his lifetime, in which I'll share more about that with you later. She didn't seem too normal. She was a little unusual. But also, when the brothers saw the UFO, they were living in a little town in North Dakota known as Northwood. It's a small town, maybe about 1,000 people, and almost everyone in the town knew each other, knew each other's business. Northwood was primarily an Air Force town. It still might be today, but it's right next to Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. And he recalls being told at the time that the brothers saw the sighting that his dad was called down early in the morning to report to the base. So here's a little more other interesting information. Now, a lot of you who've been studying the whole UFO history for years and years are probably well aware of the early UFO flaps that happened over military bases back in the 70s. Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is where his father was stationed, was at that time a 319th Bomb Wing and also a 321st Strategic Missile Wing. And his father held high security. He actually had apparently a job that involved working around nuclear and missile silos at the base. His father worked for the Air Force for like 30 years. And he retired, as I understand, as a master sergeant with a level of E7, which I don't know what that means, but that was the level that he retired with. But through the years, Stan, especially when these sightings started to happen, he tried to ask his dad, do you know anything about those early sightings? Can you tell me anything about our family? Did we ever have experiences? And to this day, Stan's father won't talk about the subject because he says, I can't. I had high clearance. I can't talk about that. I won't talk about that with you. So that's a little bit frustrating to a degree, but so that kind of like adds a little bit of other interesting, what do I do with that kind of history? What's that got to do with Stan's sightings more recently? An interesting side note on these early UFO sightings around the military bases. Apparently, some of you are familiar, for instance, with Malmstrom Air Force Base. Back, I think it was 11/7 of 75 in Great Falls, Montana. That, of course, was a Minuteman missile facility, and they also noted a violation of site security. And here's what I thought was so interesting. They reported a very large, this was 1975, which would have been 7 years after Stan's brother's sighting. They reported a very large orange UFO that hovered over the base. Now, granted, there might be a lot of orange UFOs, but still, in that general area 7 years later, I thought that was just, something kind of interesting to sort of put in the gray basket for later thought. There was also a lot of other sightings during those years, 66, I believe, and 67. And also then there was a Montana flap. 1975, 86, there was 130 reports outside of Montana at other UFO bases from both Michigan and Maine. So there was a lot of stuff going on around military up in the northern section. There was also an interesting incident surrounding an unusual event that happened right at Grand Forks Air Force Base where his father worked. This one we're not so sure if it was UFO related, but it was around 3 a.m. in the morning on November 4th, 1975. There was reports of a number of shots fired at an aircraft on the SAC alert ramp, and security police responded. Later, this was kind of funny, it was believed that this whole thing might have been a deliberate incident to divert some of the attention away of some of the massive breaches of security that were happening at other Air Force bases in the area. So it was like, let's go do all this over here and shoot some guns and stuff like that so that we don't pay attention to what's going on seriously with UFOs at other Air Force bases in the area. So, but it was kind of curious because that was the Air Force base that his father worked at. And in addition, as I mentioned earlier, Stan, he was visited 3 different times as a child, I think beginning at 5 or 6, I think again at 8 or 9, and I think one other time around 10 or 11 years old by a very strange woman. This woman was very tall, she was very thin, she had very sort of bleached out white, pale, blonde hair, and unusually in these cases, you don't hear about it much, but she had very large but peculiar blue eyes. And this woman had the uncanny ability to show up at very unusual times, unexpectedly in his life. And she always seemed to be very interested in him, not in his brothers, not in his sister, but she would say things like to the mother, "You have a very nice boy there, he's very handsome. You should take good care of him." I mean, this woman would appear, I think once it was at a parking lot when they were shopping at Christmas, once in a park in Colorado, and another time, the first time when he was 5 or 6 and he was just playing out front of his house, putting some little pebbles on top of a pedal car that he had, and she walks up the sidewalk and says, "Hi, how are you?" And it's pretty weird. To this day, I have not done any hypnotic regression with him on that to a degree, but he felt very uncomfortable talking about her in hypnosis. But what I thought I would do now, if you could turn the slide projector on, I'm just going to kind of show you a real quick, I think it's the first 2 slides I've got. Let me...
Controller right on the podium there.
Oh, good. Wonderful. And I just kind of drew a little line up here from Malmstrom Air Force Base up to Minot, which is another, I didn't mention that. Minot also had a very large sighting of a very large white star-like UFO that appeared right over the base. And then Grand Forks, where Stan lived and grew up. So during these late 60s through 70s, you had a lot of activity in this area, which was where Stan had lived. And let's see if this works. Oops, wrong way. Excellent. And then this is just a close-up once again, of the area from Malmstrom Air Force Base to Minot to Grand Forks Air Force Base. Okay, I feel so powerful with this remote up here. This is great. So I want to, if we can, actually, maybe I'll go ahead and go forward and just go to the blank, and if we could get the next video clip ready, but I'm not quite ready for you to turn it on, but in a minute I'm going to ask you to put this on. What I'd like to do now is to kind of move forward in time. I've given you a little bit of a small history about some of the unusual, just question mark areas about Stan's early years. And now what I want to do is to move forward in time to the first major sighting that Stan had. And this is some pretty raw video footage, except that we had some frames that were paused where you can see the craft up close. But this is the very first sighting that Stan ever had, to our knowledge, a conscious sighting. This happened December 27th, 2000. It happened just outside of Denver. And Stan was on his way up to an area called Red Rocks up in the mountains where a lot of concerts and things are given. He had his video camera with him, and it was wonderful that he did. He just happened to be going up there because he was going to be taking some video footage of some of the view of of downtown Denver from up at a higher elevation, and he was going to share the video with his fiancée. So he happened to be just going up the hill, and as he was going up the hill, there were high tension wires on the right side of the road, and he happened to notice that people were pulled off to the right side of the road, and they all seemed to be looking up at something, and he couldn't figure out what they were looking up at, and what I'm going to share with you now is the actual video footage of that first segment. So if you'd go ahead and play that, that would be great.
Okay. Oh my God, I'm shaking like a leaf.
Sure.
I hope I can get this. I hope this is working. Please be working. Please be working. Okay, I gotta calm down. Mark, wait until you see this. You're gonna have a frickin' canary. Okay. Alright. I am on my way up to the mountains to take some videotape to show Lisa. And it is December 27th, I believe. And I believe this is Jewel, and oh my God, I'm shaking. Saw something kind of out of the corner of my eye, just skirting power lines. It was tilted and straightened out and shot straight up into the air. And okay, let me get a better view of where I am. Okay, here's the power lines. And if you look, oh, where is it? Where'd it go? Son of a bitch, I hope I didn't lose it. Okay. Pull over.
It gets better.
There it is. There's a little sucker that just took off. I'm trying to hold it as steady as I possibly can. Where did that son of a bitch go? Oh, come on, where are you? There it is. Oh, I got it. I don't know what the hell it is. But Mark, you're going to have a canary. I wish I could hold this thing. Sorry, I swung. Okay. I'm trying to hold it as still as I possibly can. Thing just stopped. Hey, the thing just disappeared.
So that was the R version of the rough footage there. You can obviously see, I thought what was important to present this rough material was to really show the emotion and the words and the things that he was going through. And I absolutely applaud him to actually have enough calmness to videotape this, because this actually happened after the major sighting that he had. I'm going to talk about that in a little while. There was an actual hypnotic session that I did where I took him back to what led up to this video footage afterwards. So he actually saw the thing way closer than what you just saw. What you saw was probably a couple thousand feet up in the air, but there was one point when the thing was about 40 feet above the high tension wires, and it was actually rotating up. And you'll see all of that when we do the regression part of that particular event. This case has attracted a lot of media attention. A lot of people have wanted to do Stan's story, and I think, again, it's because of the richness of the evidence of this case. And what I'd like to show you now, we're going to do the next two video clips just back to back, but what I'd like to show you is some of the typical kinds of media coverage that's happened on this case. One happened to have been a channel, I think it was Channel 2 News, did this particular one back in, I think December 4th, 2001. And then also there was a segment that Entertainment Tonight did that was also on, I think it was Robert Kiviat wanted to do a documentary on this case at that time, and so they did an interview with him too. So why don't we go ahead, and what you'll see in this, by the way, are some clips of the other UFO, which seems to be a pulsating kind of a red orb. It reminds me almost of a hot air balloon. But this thing followed him around on at least 3 different instances. Also, by the way, John Schuessler saw this thing hanging out over MUFON headquarters down in Denver himself. Not right over, but kind of at a distance along the hill. So he's even seen this particular craft. And this is the one you just saw, by the way, the silver one. It's the only time Stan ever saw that, was just one time. And then within a few months, this other red orb that you're going to see started hanging out and following Stan around. So let's go ahead and play the first 2.
Sightings. As WB2 News reporter Jeff Peterson shows us now, there is actually a place to go in the metro area where you can investigate the so-called close encounters.
At the Mutual UFO Network, they keep their eyes to the sky.
We don't call them flying saucers. We call them unconventional flying objects. They're doing things that we can't do, and they're flying in ways we can't. We're witnesses.
John Schuessler is now retired, but for 36 years he worked on projects like Skylab and Gemini for NASA. When it came to UFOs, he was an avid skeptic. Not anymore.
Friends of mine in the space program saw and interchanged with UFOs. And secondarily, I then went out and met airline pilots and the like that were the people I knew and trusted, highly skilled people, highly credible people that had the same thing happen to them.
At their offices, you'll find pictures, newspaper clippings, magazines, videos, and even models of flying saucers. They hope you'll find some answers as well. The latest sighting in Colorado, how about September 30th, 7:45 p.m. at Stonehouse Park right here in Lakewood, where 30 to 40 people right here during a birthday party look over toward Estes and Yale, watch a bright object following a car, then they watch it for 15 to 18 minutes as it flies up into the sky to the west. And get this, 3 different people captured it on videotape.
Wow, that thing's weird.
Well, we consider this a pretty major sighting.
You can still see it.
Whoa!
There's some unusual things about the video in that when the UFO goes into the clouds, there was some eruption of lightning.
Hey, here's some more people. I just want to make sure I'm not nuts.
I don't know that anybody knows what it is. I know what it isn't.
There it is.
I'm Jeff Peterson, WB2 News.
Thing that's been followed.
For more information on the Mutual UFO Network, you can call 303-932-7709, or we have linked their website to ours, WB2.com. By the way, they say they get an average of 100 to 150 sightings worldwide.
Every month, I think it was. I don't know about every day, maybe every day. Here's the next one.
Obsession with extraterrestrials and our Entertainment Tonight cover story.
There it is. There's the thing that's been following me.
I want you to understand this is probably the quintessential alien abduction / UFO case ever on record.
Wow, that thing's weird.
We're told this mysterious light in the sky was shot in Colorado last September. It's the centerpiece of a new TV series producer Robert Kiviat says is currently under consideration at several networks.
NASA's people that I'm talking to right now is saying either it's a secret military craft, surveillance of some kind, or it might be for the first time that word that we rarely use, extraterrestrial.
Did you see it too?
Oh, it was incredible. It was right over our heads practically.
The man who shot the video, Stan Romanak, claims he's been abducted by aliens and has recently undergone hypnotic regression therapy in an effort to better remember his alleged experiences.
She believes he's really having memories of being abducted by alien beings.
Hollywood is cashing in on aliens this summer with Will Smith and a host of ETs in Men in Black 2. And opening in August, it's Mel Gibson in Signs, which explores the possible supernatural origins of these crop circles.
I have a basic belief in supernature, in a nature that exceeds and is higher than our own.
Kiviat believes aliens have already sent us a sign. These mysterious formations in a field in England appear to show a gigantic human face. Kiviat says a message carved right next to it may be a response to radio signals scientists beamed into space in the mid-70s.
It would be far too narcissistic to assume that in this vast universe that we are the only intelligent life.
While it's difficult to discern what's real and what's a hoax, it's clear the public's fascination with extraterrestrials is never ending.
Hamlet said it to Horatio in that Shakespeare play. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy.
Thank you, Leonard. And Kiviat tells us that the series he wants to produce would separate the believable from the preposterous. He calls it Prove It.
It was pretty amazing footage, don't you think? It reminds me a little bit of a hot air balloon or sort of like a Japanese lantern, but the thing was pulsing in some very, very unusual ways. What I thought I would do now is I thought I would go ahead and just move on to a slide that will just kind of give you a little overview of the timeline. If you're like me, I'm very visual. I need to kind of know a timeline of what something happened. So December 27, 2011, 30 a.m. That was the silver craft that you saw that he took video footage of hovering over the power lines. That was his first conscious sighting that he ever had that we know of. Then on September 20th, 2001, 7 p.m., leaving work, large pulsating reddish ball. This was the beginning of the red orb that you just saw in the last two video clips. The first time it was literally seen 500 feet above his work. Employees actually came in and said, "Stan, you got to come outside and see this thing. I don't know what it is, but it's hovering over your workplace." He got so freaked out that he decided to leave work, and he happened to still have his video camera in his van at this point because he decided it was a good idea with all the stuff that had been going on to keep the video handy, and he happened to tape it on the way home. And that night, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but he was watching the video footage of the thing he shot that was literally following him home. And that night, he went to bed late and had a very strange dream, which later when we did hypnosis turned out to not be a dream. It was a very peculiar event. So that was the second sighting. And then September 22nd, 2001, about 9 p.m., this one was particularly important because there were lots, even more witnesses with this one than there were the people who were at work the first one. This one was at Daniels Park. They estimated the size of it to be 30 feet in diameter and only 40 feet above the treetop levels. In the park, you had lots and lots of kids present and little kids pointing, going, "Look, Mom, aliens." I mean, this was amazing. And MUFON down in Denver has also got eyewitness reports and drawings from children who also saw it and drew it very, very similar to the actual footage that you just saw. So this is a very important case. This last episode, September 20th, 2001, 8 p.m., this was the last time he saw the reddish ball craft. This was, again, very, very amazing because he was on his way home, and as it says here, a beam of light shot down from this UFO. It was, again, that red orb and a bluish-green like beam shot right down, and one witness probably lost his dinner, if he had any dinner, because he saw the beam sweeping through the van. It looked like it was doing some kind of like search to see like what's inside there. And a stranger saw this going on. So wherever Stan went, it seemed during this episode that, or this time period, this UFO just really wanted to be watching him. And then the last thing we're going to cover today in the most recent things is on 11/18/2002. This was particularly very, very interesting. It was what we feel was definitely an abduction case in which he was locked outside of his home. In the morning, there were circular marks on the lawn, which we've had tested. And I'm going to go into lots more detail about all of these things, but I just wanted you to kind of have an overall timeline so it kind of put it in perspective for you. Let's see where we're at here. So what I want to do now is I want to move forward real quickly and just give you several, you can keep it on, the slide projector on, thanks. I'm going to move forward quickly and show you a few slides that will give you a little bit of more understanding on Stan's case. This first one here, Stan is a great artist among many talented things, but this is a drawing of that metallic craft that you saw the video footage of. And he points very, and talks a lot during our hypnosis session about the tremendous black area that was in the middle of this metallic craft. And these balls seem to be moving in a clockwise direction very, very fast. And he draws a comparison to the size of it with himself. But this thing was floating above the high-tension wires. Anyway, Stan has drawn a number of drawings that I think help illustrate what he saw. This is a drawing of the actual red orb that you just saw. You can see that there's lots of little kind of like panels on it. And this was showing some marks that showed up on him the day after he had a very, this is not the clearest, and I apologize, but it's as clear as it'll get. These were some marks that were found on his back the day after he'd had this strange dream when this UFO followed him home from work. This was the one where I said the UFO was hovering over his work, and he basically videotaped it following him home, and then that night he had a very strange dream, and the next morning he woke up with these very peculiar marks on his back. Let's see. And in addition, he found some very peculiar marks on his wrists. You can't quite tell there, but the hair is literally rubbed off of his wrists. I don't have pictures of it, but he also had the same thing on his ankles, where there were sores that were oozing. And it's unusual because the sores were not sore, and they healed very, very quickly. But they were also on his ankles, and it appeared that the hair was rubbed off on his ankles as well. And this is just more the same kind of marks that were on the inside of his wrists. When I did the hypnotic session with him, if I don't mention it later in today's talk, what we found out was it seemed that he was vertically standing against a wall, and there was some type of electrical device around his wrists and his ankles that seemed to be controlling him. When he would move, it would hurt. Not like savagely hurt, but it hurt. It felt like he was like a cattle prod. You know, he was encouraged basically to stay still. And apparently what this did, and this information came out in hypnosis, was burn off the hair on his wrist and on his ankles, and leaving these sores and these marks. But he had no conscious memory whatsoever the next morning with how he got them. Absolutely none, except that he knew he had a very strange dream which seemed way too real to be a normal dream. These are not originals, unfortunately, but some of you have heard about how various areas where people have had contact during an abduction fluoresce when the marks are shown under UV light. This was the original fluorescing, like on the wrists here and here, was very yellow when you look at the original pictures. So what's happening is these are the same places where he had the marks, where his hair was rubbed off on his wrists and he had the scab. So therefore they were also fluorescing, which seemed to be a very common anomaly with abduction cases. So here's some more on the backs of his hands. And for some reason, this fluorescing quality seems to remain sometimes for a couple, 2 or 3 days after an abduction, and it seems to be absolutely below the surface of the skin. It's not something topical that you can rub off. It's very peculiar. We don't know yet. Daryl Sims is doing a lot of work on fluorescing and what that means as it relates to abduction. Now, you say, he looks rather strange. This is part of the high strangeness, and there's been so much of it with Stan. Stan went through a period of time, and these were all taken with digital cameras, when his friends just took what should have been just some simple pictures of him, and every time pictures were taken, things would happen in the picture that looked really odd. In this case, it's really hard to see it, but this eye here, if it were a better copy, is real red. And this is not caused like what they call red eye. It's not from a flash of a camera. I'm going to show you another weird one, but even this right eye of here is pretty weird. But take a look at this one. If you could see the originals, these two are very red. Both eyes just look enormously red and peculiar. If that's not strange enough, how about that one? Cat eyes. These, believe me, these are not retouched whatsoever. Whoops, wrong one. Got too many remotes here. And a lot of you have probably heard about how orbs will show up in pictures. And granted, there are explanations as to how you could create possibly something like this on a camera by having a little bit of maybe dirt on the camera, or maybe fine moisture droplets, and when the flash goes off, it seems to light up what you can't physically see with your eyes. But that is not the case with this. First of all, this was a very dry summer evening, and all the pictures, I don't know whether to call it a roll, because on digital cameras you don't have rolls of film, but all the pictures before and after on this with his friends came out normal, but the pictures with him had these weird orbs. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about orbs being perhaps present in a lot of anomalous situations. Sometimes people have seen the orbs in the formation of crop circles. People I know who are definitely experienced abductees will talk about orbs floating into their rooms at night. In my support group, a lot of my people have talked about conscious memories of orbs. So this is just, I put this in the gray basket. This is really interesting. And again, it's just part of the strange stuff that goes on with Stan. Let's see what's next.
How old is Stan?
Stan, he was born in '62, so I think that makes him 41. And for a while, it seemed like life was kind of getting quiet and back to normal for Stan. And you know, it's a weird thing, and I've seen this in my support group, but it's like people who have these experiences, while a lot of them, not all of them, are terrified by the experiences, and while they want to know more about them, and they'll often say they don't want them to continue, when it gets real quiet, a lot of them will say, you know, I miss them, or I want to know more about it, or it's so boring, nothing's happening, you know. And I kind of, in a way, put Stan in that category, but there's a lot of people in my support group that are that way. You know, I'll ask them, if you could go back and change your history and have none of this ever have happened to you, would you? Some say yes, and others say no, because I think it's partly who I am today because of my experiences, or it's profoundly changed my perspective on life, or I really just want to know a lot more about what in the heck's been happening to me. So Stan is kind of like those those people, in that he has expressed when things got normal and quiet that, gee, you know, life's too quiet. So anyway, for a long time it was very quiet, until one morning about 3 a.m. and I think this goes back to November 18th, 2002. This was a time when Stan woke up outside, 3 a.m. in the morning, dressed in nothing but boxer shorts. Now, November is a pretty cold month in most states. He was locked out of the house, couldn't get back in. He found himself out by an apple tree in his backyard, and he began banging on the window to get his wife's attention. And finally, she let him in. And when she let him in, she noticed that several things. One, he had some very, very, let's say, rough and sore, really sore-looking marks on his back. He had a very strange substance in his hand, and he was very, very nauseous. And he had no idea how he got outside. Again, the doors were locked, so if he went outside for whatever the reason, he would have had to lock all the doors on his way back. And what's really interesting is, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, and to show you, this is a picture of the substance that he brought back in his hands. I don't know whether he made a conscious decision to bring this substance back, but he had it in his hands, thank goodness, and he took pictures of it, and we have had it tested. And again, it's so unusual in cases for people to come back and have any kind of physical evidence. So this was really screaming to be tested. So what we did was we had some analysis done on this particular substance a couple of different times. Some of you might be familiar with analytical scientist Phyllis Budinger. I think she's with the Frontier Analysis Limited in Ohio, and she does a lot of testing for MUFON. And these results, I'm going to give you a summary of, came back in May of 2003, and they did a lot of different kinds of testing on this. It involved a lot of modalities, including X-ray diffraction, microscopic analysis, spectroscopy, also infrared analysis, elemental analysis, and also in analyzing it, they used a Geiger counter to check to see if there was any kind of radiation from it, as well as a powerful magnet, because they wanted to see does the substance have any magnetic qualities. And they also, last but not least, did both long and short what you call UV waves to test for the fluorescing qualities of it. And here's what they found. First of all, the substance did not exhibit any kind of radiation. It did not have any kind of magnetic qualities when a magnet was put up to it, or fluoresce under UV lights. However, under a microscope, there appeared to be both dark and kind of like dark gray and light gray layers. I don't have a picture of it, with lots of very fine little, almost like needle-like substances in it. And here's what's really interesting. The dark gray substance, as well as the light gray, both had predominant amounts of elemental bismuth. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with why that might be important, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. There was also smaller amounts of aluminum, actually aluminum silicate. And even though the light gray wasn't as strong in elemental bismuth, the predominant amount of the elements within it still was bismuth. But in addition to the aluminum, it also had silica, magnesium, oxygen, calcium, and carbon. The material seems to have also been exposed to a very, very high heat. It appears when you look at it, I had a bag of it before I sent it off to the lab. It was very, very powdery. It almost reminded me of like a powdered volcanic, like volcanic rock or like pumice stone. And an interesting note is that it takes, I think, a temperature of 529 degrees Fahrenheit to melt bismuth. And I'm not saying that this was necessarily melted, but it was exposed to a very high heat. So if we back up and look a little bit at, okay, what does all this mean? If we look at what are some of the industrial uses for bismuth, is there a terrestrial explanation for how he might have come back with this bismuth in his hands? And there are a lot of uses for bismuth in everyday society. In fact, they include, among many things, pharmaceuticals. They include medicine, cosmetics, components of low-melting fusible alloys, catalysts. It's also used as an additive to improve machinability of steels and alloys. It's used for coating selenium. And interestingly also thermoelectric materials, magnets, permanent magnets, and in semiconductors. So that may or may not mean much, but one of the interesting things about the qualities of bismuth is that it was found to be what you call diamagnetic. In fact, it is one of the most diamagnetic elements known. And I didn't know at the time what that meant, but diamagnetic is a property whereby a material is repelled from both poles of the magnet, from north and south pole, equally repelled. And even though that effect is very, very weak, I found that kind of interesting, like an interesting little quirky aspect of bismuth. But the bottom line, $64 million question is, if we could figure out, and I'll give this to all of you to get working on too, and some of you may have backgrounds in working with minerals and this type of thing, or physics backgrounds, but the question is, what qualities does the substance have that might have been used in some aspect of the abduction? I think that's the really important question. He's come back with it in his hands. He very clearly, in my mind, had an abduction. Why did he come back with it? What does it mean? And in what stage of the abduction process, leading up from the abduction to whatever happened to him to coming back, did this play a part? And I think we need to look at what are the uses of bismuth to kind of perhaps begin to put a picture together of how that might relate. One of the biggest problems that really we're facing at this time as far as testing the bismuth and figuring out what it is that this material is commonly used in industry. There are many industries out there that have become very, very specialized. And it would literally take probably hundreds and hundreds of hours to research online technical and industrial internet sites, how bismuth is used. To search that to that level and to that extent could take any researcher hundreds and hundreds of hours. And I don't think that most people have that kind of time. Here's another interesting thing before we finish up with the bismuth aspect. It's really kind of curious over the last 20 years that bismuth seems to have played a very interesting part in free energy, anti-gravity research, and also in the UFO community. In fact, two very curious connections. One from, a lot of you have heard of the famous Arts Parts that were an alleged fragment from the famous Roswell crash that was researched quite a bit during the 90s. And there's some questionable research, of course, with a lot of, in the anti-gravity community, where they claim to have witnessed anti-gravity effects by electrifying bismuth. So, gosh, if that's true, if you could electrify bismuth and create an anti-gravity effect, I'm not a physicist, but I begin to think about, well, how might that relate maybe to levitating people or doing any of those kinds of things? I mean, this is really very interesting stuff. So what we're hoping now is we're hoping that we'll be able to get some more funding to do some further research on this particular substance that he brought back with him. The problem is, of course, at this point we have very little of the substance left, and every time you do testing you lose a lot of the substance in the actual testing. And these were the marks that were found. I'm going to go to the next one, which is a little bit closer. These were the marks that were found on his back the next day after that November 18th, 2002 abduction. They seem to be very oozy. They almost look like laser burns. A doctor looked at them and he had no idea where he got them, and Stan wasn't about to tell him. And I don't know if that's focused, but maybe it's pretty close. But that is one of the pictures of an absolutely amazing 11-foot circle that was found out in his backyard the next morning after he found himself outside by the apple tree. Here's another one. The one on the left side is a regular picture, and the right side is a negative of the same picture, so it's reversed colors. But you can see the absolute perfect circular impression that was in his yard. This was 11 feet in diameter. We've had this tested, the grass and the soil, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. What we did find out was that basically the soil was extremely dry in the area. When it was very, very parched, which seemed to suggest that it was exposed to very high heat. In fact, one of the things I thought was strange was when the snows came, snow would not melt inside the circle, and frost would not form inside the circle. And for a long, long time, it became a very bare spot and nothing would grow inside the circle. Now, I don't have any other pictures to show you, but this is right up against the edge of his garage. And there's an overhang on his garage where the circle is actually underneath the overhang to a degree, which suggests that whatever this was, it couldn't have come straight down. It had to maybe come down at an angle. But our question, of course, is, and we haven't done a follow-up hypnotic session on this event, what is that? How does that circle relate to his abduction? Is this some way that he was taken up and returned? We don't know. But the grass seems to show a lot of anomalous reactions that are typical in these kinds of cases and show a lot of very similarities to crop circles that are formed. I had a lot of this done, this initial grass and soil sample testing done by Dr. Levengood, and what he said at the very end was that he felt that this dirt must have been exposed to some kind of microwave energy at a wavelength that was capable of penetrating the soil. So he thinks it has something to do with microwave energy. That was the bottom thing he came up with. And there's a lot more to the soil testing, and I don't have time to go into a lot more about that right now. But in a moment, I'll just leave the slide up for the moment. I'm going to go back to talking with you a little bit about Stan's regression, because that was so interesting. I spent 3 or 4 hours with him initially back in June of last year, doing this very, very long regression session. And one of the things that I want to tell you about my work, and I'm sure that Craig Lang can identify with this too, and that is I never, ever lead my clients. There's been a lot of criticism about the susceptibility when someone is in hypnosis, that if you say something like, "And what color was the UFO?" Of course you're leading someone if they tell you that there's just a light that they're noticing. Well, I was very, very careful in not leading him. All of my questions were always very general, very open-ended, such as, "And what did you see next? And how do you feel about that? And why is that important?" If you hear me saying anything detailed to him in these sessions, it's because this is information that he's given to me consciously before the session. And he already knew it. So I was just feeding him this information back. But I never led him in any way at all. The first clip that I want to share with you, which will be the next clip on the videotape, is after his third sighting. And this took place in the Denver area September 20th, 2001, right after work around 7 p.m. This was the one we were talking about a little bit earlier, where he saw it right over his work. This involved the red balloon-like craft that you saw in the first 2 clips that I showed you. And in our session, he expressed the fact that he was really afraid that whatever these things were, that they wanted something from him. And he was still reeling from this first event of the metallic craft 9 months earlier. So he'd had 9 months of nothing, and then there was this third episode. And when he saw the silver craft up at the Red Rocks, as you saw, he was just really freaked. But in a moment, I'm going to share this next part. And during hypnosis, what I did was I took him back to the night when he said he had this dream, the night when he went up to bed and he woke up with the marks the next morning. And he said, "Gosh, that dream was just so incredibly real. It was like nothing I've ever had before." And what I did was I took him after he went to bed, and I simply had him observe himself sleeping. Just watch yourself sleeping, moving him moment by moment, every few seconds forward to the next thing that he noticed. And what I want to show you now in the next video footage clip is what he noticed after he went to bed. So go ahead and play that clip.
What the hell would anybody be knocking at the door?
That's kind of dark.
What do you watch? What do you watch as you notice that you hear this out front? What do you do next? What do you watch yourself do next?
I'm getting up. See, maybe there's a fire. Maybe there's an emergency.
Do you normally get somebody knocking at your door in the middle of the night?
No.
Okay.
Could be a drunk person lost, maybe.
Okay. And so what do you do to find out?
I get up.
And then what happens?
I'm getting to the door and my sister's opening the door. Oh my God.
And what happens when you open the door?
Wow. There's like 3 people there.
And what are these 3 people?
Well, they look like they're costumes, like Halloween costumes.
Like Halloween costumes? What makes you think they look like Halloween costumes?
Because they're weird looking.
What particularly is the most weird thing about their costumes?
They have really big heads and they look like a cancer or something. There's no hair on them at all.
Like a cancer patient would have no hair?
Yeah, it's just like straggly hair.
And what color is that hair?
It's white. It's white. It's like it has no pigmentation.
Is that true for all 3 of them?
Yeah, it is.
And how tall would you say these people are?
They're a little bit shorter than me. About the same size as my sister. They're a little bit shorter than me.
Where would they come up to if you were standing there as you are in front of them? At what point as far as the height on your body?
Well, I don't know, maybe to my chin, a little above my chin.
And you're 6 feet tall, right?
Yes.
So maybe around like 5'2" or 5'3", somewhere around there?
Pretty close.
And what do they seem to be wearing?
Well, one's wearing like a long kind of robe-like thing with like a necklace, some kind of weird necklace. And the other 2 are, well, they're wearing robes too, but one's more like kind of like a jumpsuit.
And what color is this jumpsuit?
It's a light blue. They're all the same color.
So they're all wearing some type of light blue clothing?
Yes.
One of them is wearing a jumpsuit and the other are wearing robes?
The female's wearing a robe.
And how can you tell she's a female?
She's got big boobs.
She has big boobs, huh?
That's weird.
What's weird about that?
Just the way they look.
How would you describe their faces?
Weird, really weird big heads. How do they hold their heads up? They're weird looking. They have big eyes, big kind of like, they look almost like distorted Japanese or Chinese, and except their faces where their mouth and noses is really long. Really long.
Now is the part of their face from the nose down to the mouth seems to be very long? Or what is long about it?
It's just the jawline is long. The nose is kind of small, like almost like there's no nose, just a real tiny nose, and like a little tiny mouth. They have lips, but their lips are really tiny too.
Very tiny.
Yes.
And the nose that's really small, does it stand out, or is it?
No, it's just like a real tiny nose. How do they breathe?
As you can see, Stan has a great sense of humor. I will show you a slide of what he thought those beings looked like, but at this point in our regression, Stan reports that the beings actually come in. They push his sister aside, and he's telling her literally, quote, "Don't let the freaks in," unquote. That was his language. He said she just stands there. His sister just kind of stands there, and he says, looking kind of stupid. He has just sort of like a love-hate relationship with his sister, and he sometimes isn't so kind to her. But he says she just stands there looking kind of stupid at the door. Apparently, he was standing about 10 feet away from these beings when they wanted to come in. And he reported that they basically just kept looking at him. It was like they weren't interested in her, they were interested in him. Then he starts to get, during the session, he remembered getting a headache at that point, and he's scared. And what I do is I make a suggestion at that point that he hypnotically move outside of his body and simply observe what happened next. One of the things in hypnosis is if somebody's traumatized, you can move them outside of their physical body and simply have them observe, because by doing that you're detaching their emotions. It doesn't mean that they won't be upset, but they're not in the experience as much as when they're outside the experience. So that's what I did next. And now remember, at this point, he's still thinking that, these are some kind of like really weird people that just showed up at his door with masks on, and maybe they're like wanting to rob him or something. He still doesn't get within the session that these are aliens. So at this point during the session, he seems to have been taken. I can't show you all the video, it would take hours and hours, but the next thing he remembers is being aboard a craft. He remembers that the same 3 beings that were at his door are now with him on the craft, and they are looking at him. And during his memory of being on board, he recalls a lot of details. That apparently there was a woman, or there was a female, or one that appeared to be a female. She seemed to be the predominant one that communicated with him. And they seemed to be involved in some kind of tissue sample taking from his back, which is so interesting because you saw the pictures earlier of the marks that he showed up with on his back. So what he's now recounting, without my even asking him, was how the marks showed up on his back, that they were taking tissue samples out, and he began to talk about how they were putting them like into a little box, or collecting it in a box of sorts, putting it almost like into a little drawer or something to that effect. Also, at this point, the female beings began communicating a lot with him, and he said that every time she would communicate with him, it was always in symbols and mathematical equations, that basically this is how they communicated with him. And these mathematical equations also came out of this experience. And if you heard about the mathematical equations that Stan wrote out, I'm going to be showing you that in a little bit, as well as talking about the meaning of them. But the mathematical equations that he drew within hypnosis, we had them later analyzed by 3 different physicists: Dr. Jack Kasher, who is the state director for Nebraska, Dr. Bernie Heisch, who's an astrophysicist, and also Dr. Hal Puthoff. All 3 gave their opinions on the equations. And the basic comment was that there was no way that Stan, with his limited 4th grade understanding of math, as well as his lifelong diagnosis of dyslexia, could have come up with these equations. And you'll see how amazing they are in just a few minutes. While he was aboard, after the medical procedures, he found himself one-on-one with the female being, and she seemed to be telepathically communicating with him. I hear this so much from abductees, but he said she seemed to like cock her head, and she would just kind of look at him, and he would ask her questions, and as he asked her questions, again, his head was just filled with numbers, symbols, equations. This was the way he was receiving information, but it was driving him nuts because he had no clue what any of this meant. He was really emotionally distraught over a lot of this. Like many experiencers, he talked about how communication does happen telepathically. And again, it was at this moment when he was aboard the craft, he started asking typical questions that if you were conscious enough, you might like to ask yourself, like, where are you from? Why are you here? Why me? All these kinds of things. And again, every time he would ask, he'd get these strange symbols and equations. And during this communication, he received the impression that something's going to happen. And he felt it was of a prophetic nature. And he said it was going to be sooner rather than later. And he wasn't sure of the nature of the situation. He just felt it involved the whole world, and everyone needed to know. And he received the impression that the female being wanted everyone to know, and this was his job, was getting the information out. Yet at this point, he wasn't really sure what the information was. He just felt it was really, really important. And I asked him during hypnosis, how she shared this. Once again, he said, well, she says it in pictures, but what I'm seeing in my head is I'm seeing something prophetic that has to do with floods. I'm seeing really fast winds. I'm seeing people dying, animals dying, plants dying. And I know that something's going to happen. And he said, she won't tell me exactly how, but she says something is going to happen, like we're going to go through something, or something's going to pass by us. Or maybe it's something we did, I don't know, she won't tell me. And he began sharing how he had all these symbols in his head, and he felt just like he wanted to literally explode with this information. And I want to take a moment and just say this is so typical of people that I work with, many, many people who've had incredible downloads of information. Or I don't know if you're familiar with a woman named Prudence Calapresis. She does remote viewing. And she used to talk about how a little gray dude would download thought balls into her head that would gradually open up with more and more information. But I get a lot of experiencers who aren't even high school graduates, and yet they're given information that is so above them. They don't know what to do with it. They don't understand it. And yet if you show it to a physicist, they'll say, you know, some of this really makes sense. And Stan seems to be that kind of a person, receiving a tremendous amount of information that he just had no clue of what it meant. And in a moment, I want to ask our video person to put the next clip on. At this point forward, what I'm doing in the session is I moved him forward to when he's returned from the encounter on board, and he seems quite shocked to find his sister is still standing at the front door. It's like she's switched off or something. So could we go ahead with the next video?
And just for a moment, anything else?
I'm going inside, and my sister's still standing there, with a good look on her face.
Where is she standing?
She shut the door, and she's standing by the door, just standing by the door.
So all this time while you've been gone, your sister's just been standing by the door?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
She looks silly.
Mm-hmm. What looks silly about her?
She just looks like she's standing by the door, waiting for something, and...
Mm-hmm. How would you describe the expression on her face?
Just blank.
Mm-hmm. So there's no particular expression on her face?
No.
So when you go back, the door is still open, or did she just shut it?
No, it's shut.
Mm-hmm.
The door's shut.
Mm-hmm.
Can't believe she's still standing there. That's silly.
So at this point, you've come down from the balcony, and now you're back in the house.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to go lay down.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what happens after you see your sister?
She gets up, she goes to bed. She just goes, lays down again, and I go lay down and fall asleep.
And do you say anything to her?
No. I just kind of look at her and kind of laugh because she looks stupid.
And does she say anything to you?
No, she just goes straight to bed.
Mm-hmm. The two of you go back up to bed.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I always laugh when I watch that and I hear him say, you know, she just looks silly. She's just standing there. My understanding of this is that his sisters seem to be, as they typically say in these cases, switched off, that she's just literally sort of in a catatonic state and can't move. She has this sort of a blank expression and is still standing there. And of course, this is very typical of a lot of cases that we hear about. Now, earlier I mentioned that Stan had this memory of what we call the possum people. He had this dream where he woke up in the morning and he remembered very clearly that he had this peculiar dream that was like nothing he'd ever dreamed before. And earlier I mentioned that at this point what I did was I moved him forward a few minutes into the sleeping period just to ask him a little bit more about like what happened next. And all of a sudden, after he's describing this whole scenario of coming back, his sister's at the front door, and I said, you know, what happened next? And he goes, oh my God, that was the dream. He remembered that what he thought was a dream the next morning was not a dream, and what he'd just gone through was the dream. And it was so interesting to literally, you know, watch that realization that he had. And I think that what's interesting is that, when he had the dream of what he called the possum people, it's very easy to see, how he might have decided that these were possum people, because in his mind he's having a conscious, what you call a screen memory, because his beings look so similar in his mind to possums. I said to him, what made you call them possum people? And he says, well, they have long jaws, and they have like strange snouts and very small noses. And he could really see how he had interpreted this very strange dream or memory within a dream as a memory of just being confronted with possum people. Now, a few months after our session, Stan recalled his hypnotic memory of what the possum people looked like. I'm going to show you a slide next. Is the slide machine still on? Thanks. And this was a sketch that he did. He admits that this is not perfect. We'd really like to try to get a forensic artist to draw while he's in hypnosis. That would be a really good idea. But Stan is a very good artist, and this was the closest he could come. And he was very clear about the idea that these beings seemed to have blue eyes, and they had white scleras, and they seemed to have pupils. And you could kind of see by this drawing how he might have interpreted these beings as being possum people. Our memories are not perfect. So the next morning when he wakes up, again, he simply recalls after this remembering a very lifelike, very eerie dream. And at that point, his sister then discovers the marks on his back and the strange marks on his wrists and on his ankles. And at this point, it's really strange. Like a lot of people, Stan tries to come up with all kinds of reasons as to why he has the marks on his back or these marks on his wrists and ankles. He goes to his bed and he actually tries to see if there's some kind of like broken springs coming through the mattress or something. How do I explain this stuff? It didn't make sense to him. And this is just another picture of the marks again that he found on his body. There's not really enough time to share all the details of our hypnosis session, but what I'd like to show you now is I want to give you a sense of emotions, the kind of emotion that comes out during hypnosis. And I want to point out that what you're going to see now is Stan's going to be talking about a particular event in which he had a sighting, but I want you to notice he's not just retelling the event. He's actually reliving it. And in a moment, what I'm going to show you is the actual hypnotic session that we did from the December 27th, 2000 event. That's the first event, the one with the metallic craft that was above the high tension wires. And if you recall, if I said at the beginning of the talk today, this happened about 11:30 in the morning. He's on his way up to Red Rocks, and what you're going to hear is so interesting is his whole recount live as it happened.
Go ahead and take yourself in the car.
Okay.
Take yourself forward in time. You're driving up towards Red Rocks. You're getting near the foothills.
I am, and I'm just over the hill, and I can see Dinosaur Ridge, and all these people are pulled over, and I could see this guy in a truck or blazer looking up at the telephone poles, and I look up, it's like, oh my God.
What do you notice?
Wow, it's a big kite or big huge balloon or something. Oh my God, that's not a balloon.
What is it?
I don't know what it is. It's weird looking.
And where?
It's metal. It's metal. I don't know what it is. Is it on the wires? No, it's fine. It's floating above the wires.
And as you look at this metallic thing that's above you, how would you describe it?
It's rounded. It's like segmented. It's rounded on top, and it's got these balls, these weird balls on the bottom. And they're like spinning really slowly around the bottom. It's like, oh my God, what is it? It's black in between. It's really black. I can't believe these. What the hell is that?
So right in between the balls, there's this black area?
Yes, it's black, really black. It's creepy black.
How would you describe that?
I can't. I've never seen anything like it. It's no light at all. It looks like it goes on forever.
And this is like early in the morning, like 11:30, late in the morning?
It's about 12. Mm-hmm. It's about 12 o'clock, I think.
And there's this blackness in the middle that's very different from anything that you've seen.
The whole thing's tilted forward. It's like almost like a real rounded pyramid, segmented kind of thing with these round balls rotating around the bottom. Mm-hmm. It's like, what in the world?
And is there any sound related to this?
Nothing. No sound. No nothing. Mm-hmm. No nothing.
And what does it seem to be doing as you're looking upward at it?
Is this some kind of joke? Now it starts moving. I speed up. This is... Oh, watch out. I almost crashed the car. I speed up, and it seems to be like keeping pace with me. Mm-hmm. That's weird. I step on the gas, speed up even more, and I get in front, and I realize, oh man, I have my camera. I gotta get my camera.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you do next?
So I grab my camera, and then I start rolling down the window. Wow, it just made this explosion, this popping noise, this loud, like a sonic boom when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Plane used to fly over. Mm-hmm. I could feel it through my chest. And then it stopped. It just stopped and just kind of stayed there for a while. And I try to get my camera out. I try to get it through my windshield of my car. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, Mark, you're gonna have a canary when you see this.
So at what point does it make this sonic boom?
When I rolled down the window to try to get a better look at it, it like straightened up.
Mm-hmm.
It just popped.
So it like rotated back up?
It was tilted forward and then just rotated up and popped.
Mm-hmm. And you can almost feel that sound going through your body.
Oh man, my heart's pounding so fast, it feels like it's going to pound out of my chest.
Mm-hmm. And so you began to videotape it?
I tried to get it. It was out there a ways, and I got it, and I couldn't get my damn camera I was shaking really bad. I couldn't get it to focus.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get it to focus. It focused. I got it.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
And how would you describe this metallic finish on this strange craft?
Like black metal, like black burnt, shiny chrome almost.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it was shiny or dull?
It was shiny.
Mm-hmm.
It was shiny.
Mm-hmm. And had you ever seen this particular thing before?
Never, ever. I've never seen anything like this before. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my God, I saw a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, after that particular sighting, there were several witnesses that said they saw two jet fighters fly overhead. They seemed to be chasing the UFO or seemed to be going in that direction, which was very, very interesting, but unfortunately we haven't been able to verify the authenticity of that, and of course, what Air Force Base is going to tell you, yes, you're right, we were chasing that UFO up there that day, but it seemed rather coincidental. Also, did you notice that when he was going through that, what an emotional reaction he was having to that, like, oh my God, and he was talking about the blackness underneath that UFO. I mean, he was talking about it was just a black that just seemed to go on forever, almost very ominous in some way. But it was, you could just, one of the things that I do when I'm a hypnotherapist is I really watch people's body reactions, watching him breathe, watching him move, watching what he's doing, watching his reactions. And a lot of that part of the session you could see he was actually driving. Oh my gosh, I almost crashed the car. He's very much a deep hypnotic client. He goes almost into a somnambulant state. Not too many people, maybe 20% of the people will go that deeply, so he's actually reliving it, not just recounting it. Now at this point, I brought Stan completely out of hypnosis, and he began sharing that he recalled finally a lot more about the symbols and the mathematical formulas that he'd been given. And he says, gosh, now I can see them so clearly in my head, I could like describe them. And I said, could you write them down? And he says, oh, yeah, I could. So with that, I gave him a piece of paper, and it was a great big pad of paper, and I gave him a pen, and in about 5 minutes, he began to write out a full page of equations and symbols. And it was amazing to watch how specific he was as he wrote this out, like he'd written it out many, many times. He was very thoughtful. He was very specific about it. And I'm going to move you forward to the point when Stan has just completed that page of equations. I'm going to have the next video clip in a minute. But what I really want you to notice in this next short clip, this is really important. He's just finished the equations, but what I want you to notice is the tremendous emotion that Stan feels. He is like flooded with the emotion of what the heck does this mean, and you know, what am I supposed to do with it? Yes.
Was he still in trance when he drew this?
Yes.
He was in trance. Okay.
Yes.
Did you put him back into trance to do this?
No, I'm sorry. You asked if he was in trance. No, I brought him out of trance at this point. I said, can you now write what you remembered aboard? Because he was in hypnosis. He says, oh my God, I can remember everything clearly now. So I said to him, could you write it down on paper? And he says, absolutely, I could. So I brought him out of hypnosis. I handed him a pad of paper and a pen, and I said, write what you remember. And it took him 5 minutes to write that. There is a process I do in a little while where I actually have him do it within hypnosis, but this is out of hypnosis. So again, this is a short clip. Let's go ahead and play it and just watch the emotion. There's a lot of information, isn't there?
I feel like I'm going nuts.
You're okay. You'll be all right. The more you bring this out, the better you'll feel. You'll just be able to help release it and let go of it.
I don't know what any of this means.
It's okay. You don't need to know what it means right now. When you watch that, you know, you can't help but feel a compassion for what Stan has been going through, both he and his family. It's just a tremendous amount of emotion. Like, you know, can you imagine being exposed to this kind of stuff just coming out of you, and you don't know what the knowledge means? You don't know what to do with it. You don't know why it's happening to you. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip ahead to where he's describing what he's just written and what the symbols mean to him. And these symbols were given to him again when he was with the female being up on the craft that night that he had the dream of the possum people. And again, he shared that these beings seem to communicate in mathematical language to him. You'll also notice towards the end of the clip that this is the first time he begins talking about the prophetic warning that he felt he was given. Now remember, this was done consciously after he came out of hypnosis. And notice as you watch this segment how specific he is about the equations that he's written, especially when you take into consideration his lack of any kind of mathematical understanding. So go ahead and play the next clip, please. Is this what part of what you were receiving when you were
This
sitting?
is all of what I was receiving.
Is this when you were with that female?
Yeah, it's
being?
like they think mathematically, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to think it.
And so, once again, can you maybe share with the camera what you thought you would ask specific questions? And you said that one thing meant something and another thing meant something else. Can you repeat?
Well, when I asked how they got here, this part is what popped into my head.
Mm-hmm.
This part right here.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm shaking this whole upsetting
That's
for
okay.
me. And then when I asked where they came from, this part right here, I think, is where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea what this part is right here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what any of it means or what any of it is.
And you said something about dreaming. You hadn't put that down. You said something about dreaming, something about this.
I dreamt this last night, and I started kind of becoming obsessed with it, but I just kind of put it out of my head until I know where these came from now.
Is this the first time you've ever dreamed about something like this?
Yeah, well, I knew they like communicated somehow in my dream or whatever this was, but I didn't know exactly how. I couldn't have any way of explaining it other than this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you knew when
This is a little, this actually should be like this. I'll make this.
Notice he's correcting something here.
This one will go for edges. P, That's the real way it looked, but I kind of improvised
so
I could draw it better.
okay, so I'm not sure, maybe you can hold it up better than I can at my angle. I'm seeing a circle with 4 circles in it with P.
Yeah, there's, well, this is a kind of a foreshortened or simplified version of this. This is like, I don't know what it means, but there's a circle and there's 2 circles on the circle.
Okay.
And there's an E in each circle.
An E.
And then there's 4 circles inside the circle. 2 of them, one across from each other, is P, and the other one is N.
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 Okay, and you don't know what those stand for?
I don't know what any of this is. I have no clue.
And you started, and you had a dream about
I think this means, I take that back. I think this means moving forward or accelerating forward.
And what does that relate to, do you think? You don't know at this point. It's just the first thought that comes to your mind.
Yeah, it's the first thought that comes to my mind, but that's it.
Okay.
I don't know what this means. And maybe you can tell me.
At one point you were talking about a triangle, was one an upside down triangle?
That's it.
I see that, That was somehow related to the information that you were receiving.
Yes.
And as you consciously think about some of the images that you received during about the future.
Oh, that's even scarier. It's, I also didn't mention, or maybe I should mention, that she gave me the thought this in my dream that not all of these, there's like bunches of these different things out there, just bunches and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
What do you mean by things?
I don't want to say aliens.
Beings of some sort?
Yeah, I don't want to say that though, because I kind of don't believe in this.
I understand.
And not all of them are good.
That was the feeling you got from her? She was warning you in some way?
Yeah, they were warning us. Not all of them are good. And also that something's going to happen, and I don't know when. Maybe in December. They won't tell me. They won't tell me what either. All I know is I got something about photons, something to do with a photon stream or photon belt, but just briefly, and then or something passing by us, really big, and it like the Earth flipped or turned or.
So that was the feeling that you got from what the information.
Because I couldn't understand what they were saying. I mean, it was so way above me.
I think one of the things that you'll notice about Stan is he is so innocent, and this guy is really bright in so many ways and yet very childlike, and I just really had to laugh, and I think all of you did too, when you heard him say, well, I don't want to say, it's like, I don't really believe in them, I don't believe in aliens. Even all this stuff was happening to him, he was still very reticent to believe that it was happening. Even at the end of our session, he said, did I just make all this up? Or is this real? Is this really happening? And I think a lot of people, I see Craig shaking his head, that he hears that a lot with people.
Usually for about a month afterwards, for a while, they decide they made it all up.
Yeah. It's more comforting that way, isn't it? What I found so interesting was, did you notice I kind of put the little red laser up there, how he had taken for a moment and created the longer version of this first line of equations, yet he still didn't know what any of that meant. Now at this point, I suggested that we do some hypnotic writing. And actually, this is a process that allows a person to write what their unconscious mind knows without putting them through a lot of undue trauma. It basically bypasses the conscious critical mind, and you make a quick suggestion that the hand is numb and that the hand basically is a little robot and will write whatever the unconscious mind knows. And it's a really great process to do, because you're doing this in hypnosis, and you're making the suggestion also that when they come out of hypnosis that they'll be able to interpret the meaning of what they've written when they're in hypnosis. And this is a great way to get information that doesn't re-traumatize the client. So under hypnosis, what I decided to do, using automatic writing, was I wanted to ask him some questions relating to the drawings that you just saw. What I wanted to help him do was to understand a little bit more deeply what, the nature of these drawings meant, not only to him, but what implications they may have for us. I gave him time to respond to each of the questions, and what you'll notice towards the end is there's a real focus on warning people. He's still going into that thing about something's going to happen, there's a prophetic thing that's going to take place. But let me tell you the 4 questions that I asked him within hypnosis. First was, what do the drawings mean to you? The second question was, if you haven't already answered this, what do these drawings relate to? The third question was, if there's anything else that's important about these drawings, go ahead and draw that now. And the fourth question, what are you supposed to know about the prophetic visions you've received? So let's go ahead and play the next video clip and you'll see this.
And just go ahead and look at the drawings that you've drawn there.
Wow, it's not my handwriting.
And the first things I asked you was, what do these drawings mean? And if you look at that, tell me what they suggest.
This one's quantum jump, whatever the hell that is.
Quantum what?
Jump.
Quantum jump?
Jump.
Okay.
Kind of a wormhole or something.
Okay, so that's the first thing that's...
Well, that's how they travel, that's how they hold space. They find a connection.
Okay.
This one is bending space, this one is step forward. They can pop in one way and come out another. This one is where they're from, this one is where we're from. This is when all this bad stuff's going to happen. And this is, I don't know what this says. Can you read that? Stops. I don't know if that's my handwriting, actually.
You're talking about right here?
This.
So I see the word warning here. But let me just finish asking you some of the other questions. I asked you what do these drawings relate to?
How they get here, where they're from, and there's a warning, obviously.
And what is the warning about?
Something's going to happen, something bad's going to happen.
And then I asked you, what is the most important thing about these drawings?
That we're supposed to warn people.
I also asked you, what are we supposed to know about the prophetic visions that you've received?
That we're supposed to warn people. We're supposed to warn people.
Okay. And you're not aware yet of what that is about?
No.
Okay.
I think they think it'll be too traumatic. Because it's not a good thing. And I don't know if it's going to happen this year, next year, or 2 years, but I think it's going to happen sooner than later.
And then I asked you the question of why you? Why are you involved? And you wrote something there.
I can't tell you.
Did you write that down? Okay, so you got the information. Okay, and was it satisfying to you?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and you can consciously remember it?
I can tell you personally.
Okay. But it's not something that you want to share right now?
No.
Okay, I respect that. Do you want to hold up the drawings of what you've done here so that the camera can see this? Try to get it in... Maybe if you wanted to point to some of the things, if you could see it, that you are relating to.
By the way, this has been a really bizarre experience. I'll get it straightened out. This is a symbol for quantum jump. I don't exactly understand it, but that's a symbol. This is a symbol for bending space. This is a symbol for stepping forward. Somehow they can just somehow they can just step forward.
Okay.
This is where they're from. This is where we're from. And I just now looked at this and figured out where that is. You could probably look at that and notice what that is.
What do you think?
It's a constellation somewhere.
Now let you tell me.
Yeah, it's Orion's Belt.
Orion's Belt, is that what you got?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know which part of Orion's, that's wild. This is where we are.
Okay.
Right here.
Okay.
And I don't know much about how the planet's set, but I'm guessing these are planets. And this is the date that this bad thing's going to happen. And you can tell by the planets, how the planets are aligned.
Position of the planets?
Position of the planets, where they are. I gather this is the sun.
Okay.
This must be us.
Okay.
I don't know what that one is, and I don't know what this line is.
And what are the right
I think that's Mars. I don't know what this line is. And this says warning, hurry, either warning or warming, and then it says stop, 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 and then helping.
Helping, okay. All right, good.
And then if you want to see...
We'll do that off camera, okay? So, is there anything else that you want to share about how
I don't believe, this is just, it's hard for me to believe any of this. This is nuts.
And is there a certain amount of sort of a release or...
There is, because this stuff is really real. This isn't, I thought this might be just a dream. But it's not. People are really going through this.
And it's really profoundly affecting your life, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, now I know why I'm so obsessed and couldn't figure out why.
I hope I'm keeping you somewhat stimulated there. Unfortunately, I think what's happened here is when we blew it up this large on the screen, you're losing a lot of clarity, and it's unfortunate, and a little bit darker than the original video is if you had it on just a normal TV. I'm going to show you some close-ups with slides that'll be real clear on some of the symbols that he used, and I'm going to explain them to you also as well. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. This was the first drawing of what he drew consciously that you saw him do. When he said, I could see these symbols in my mind so clearly that I could practically draw them. And I gave him a pad of paper, and he began drawing that first episode where you saw him drawing so profusely. And I want to explain to you what these mean. I think this is absolutely fascinating. This first line here basically is a reference to helium and element 115. And of course, and also apparently it appears to be what they call the most correct ground state electron configuration for element 115, which has not been developed yet. But according to Bernie Heisch, he said it is the best extrapolation that anyone could come up with based on what we know about element 114. And in the opinion of astrophysicist Bernie Heisch, he said there's no way that Stan could have just come up with this in your office on a conscious level, on his own. It's not a random guess. You couldn't have done that. And although this is nothing particularly that advanced, and it's not the Holy Grail, and it doesn't tell us anything real significant, the fact that he drew this and he remembered being told this aboard the craft is very, very interesting. Also, I think a lot of you maybe remember some of the early years in ufology when physicist Bob Lazar supposedly worked out at Area 51 and talked about element 115, that was supposed to have been some type of a propulsion, part of the propulsion that was used on some of the back-engineered UFOs that were out at Area 51. So a lot of us have heard about the concept of element 115. And it was so interesting because, as you remember a few minutes ago, he said that first line represented how they got here. So how in the world would he know that? So how they get here relates to element 115. Also, I want to say that on the same line from here to here, the second half of the top line, that this is one of Maxwell's 4 equations from electromagnetic theory. Now remember again, this is a guy 4th grade level of mathematics. He's dyslexic. Every time he sends me an email, he misspells words. I mean, here's this guy writing this stuff. Maxwell's equation simply represents or talks about how you can generate magnetic fields from changing electric fields, which is something that happens apparently in the power lines to your house. But nevertheless, it's amazing that Stan could come up with this. Over here on the on the far left, he said that this was relating to where they're from. And I thought that was quite interesting because this turns out to be the constellation of Orion. And circled here, we believe, is the star Mintaka, which is one of the stars in the Orion's belt. I let him tell me that, not I didn't tell him that. Also, interestingly enough, he draws, was in response to where we're from. And if you notice, there are 10 planets present on here. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, plus the sun, and this is us. And I think this circle is supposed to be the asteroid belt. But what I thought was really interesting is he consistently, in all of our sessions that we did, drew, when he was relating to where we're from, 10 planets, which a lot of you know some of the early work that Zecharia Sitchin has done, some of the early work that the Sumerians have written about, that we originally had 10 planets. So why was Stan constantly drawing 10 planets? And he accurately circled us as being the third rock from the sun. Third rock from the sun. So, you know, how could Stan come up with this so randomly? Also, another important thing here is this right here is the Drake equation. And a lot of you people probably know the Drake equation basically is an equation by which we can come up with the approximate number of possible advanced civilizations in the universe or in the galaxy. And apparently the definition of an advanced civilization is one in which has developed some type of radio transmission capability. In other words, an advanced civilization should be able to, or thought to possess the ability to transmit radio waves. And that is the marker, again, of an advanced civilization. Now, this is absolutely accurate from here to here. This is right through here, the Drake's equation, but he's put here times 100, which Hal Puthoff and Bernie Heisch thought was pretty interesting because it kind of suggests whatever you think is out there, times it 100. That was the kind of feeling that I got from that. Some of the, there's several other symbols here. We are kind of thinking that these were just some symbols he came up with that might have represented wormholes or black holes here. And later I asked him after the session, what does this mean and this mean? And he said, well, he felt this had to do with vast distances of space and that they could do that, they could travel by simply bending space and making it very easy to travel great distances by bending space. Now, where does Stan, know that kind of information? So that's his own particular symbol for that. And then this is very, very interesting. This is like, the other one was fairly basic. This is not so basic. This one happened outside of hypnosis several months later. August of 2002, what happened was Stan actually got up in the middle of the night. He's had episodes of sleepwalking, and he doesn't remember writing this, but he wrote it in the middle of the night, and the only reason he knows he wrote it was because he recognized his own handwriting, and over on the side of the bed there were like pens all over the floor and pencils, and paper was on the ground, and the clock was upside down, and he awoke to find this. And he knew it was his writing, but he couldn't understand what any of it meant. So he had this very interesting event that happened in the middle of the night, and I gave this information to both Hal Puthoff as well as Bernie Heisch. And to simplify it, what they basically said was these two lines down here, line 2 and line 3, support in some way line 1, but all three basically are about how one might bring about a wormhole or how one might make a wormhole. And I found that astounding, and they said that was really quite accurate. It's very conceivable mathematically that that's, I'm not a physicist, but that's what they said. They said that this would be the instructions for how to go about bringing in a wormhole. So what? We could maybe travel through them or some sort of thing such as that. Jack Casher said that he thought all these formulas are quite accurate. The small line in the middle that starts with a V, Apparently this relates to how to generate voltage. It's Lenz's law of physics or one of Maxwell's 4 equations. And then this last line from the left to the right here, this seems to indicate a calculation of the surface area of a black hole. How did Stan do that? Is there anyone in here that could have come up with this? Pardon me? And again, you see kind of a repeat at the bottom of the 2 little symbols that he used for, seemed like bending space. I think that was his own symbol somehow he came up with, or maybe he was given in some way. But again, this is pretty amazing stuff. Okay, I'm just going to go take that off for a moment. We are at about 1:45, and I've still got more if you're interested in hearing. I don't know how you're all holding up. But what I wanted to do, you're all welcome to stretch if you want, if you don't make any noises, but a lot of people have asked about, okay, first of all, Stan and I and Dr. Jack Cashier, Dana Tybalt, and Stan all did a presentation for the International UFO Congress in February of this year in Laughlin, Nevada. And a lot of what you've just seen I presented there, there's been some updates since, but a lot of people have asked, what's happened with Stan since he got back from the conference, since February? You know, what's the latest updates? Well, there's been a lot that's happened with Stan, and some of the events have been subtle, and some of them have not been quite so subtle. And understand that due to confidentiality, I can't share everything, but I will share the things and the events that I can. Stan has had a number of sightings since he got back from the conference. This is kind of an interesting picture here. This was on March 16th at 9:30 p.m. This is on a night with a full moon, and there's what appears to be a green disc down here. But he took original videos of this, and this UFO just zipped all around through the moonlight, and he took a number of pictures. So he just happened to go out one night with his brand new camera, and his wife and he were just standing out on the back deck and wanted to see what they could take pictures of around the moon, so they got that. And then, I'm sorry this isn't very clear, but what you're seeing is the crystal of his watch that's cracked. And what's really strange is that at some point after the conference, he started hearing some very strange tones in his house. They were tones that really were bothering his entire family. They didn't seem to be, if you go outside like 20 feet from the house, you couldn't hear the tones, but you came back inside the house and you could hear it. And he happened to call me one day when he was wearing his watch, and he said, "You've got to hear this," and I actually recorded it. And as he was talking, the crystal on his watch actually cracked from the tone. So I thought that was another interesting piece of information. And then this one, I don't know if you can see it here. This is an unretouched photo. This actually happened on as late as September 7th, just a month ago. There are 3 prong marks here. I'll show you the next slide, which is touched up with ink. You can see the difference. Going back to the original one, he woke up in the middle of his living room at about 5 in the morning and had no idea how he got out there. He didn't think much about it, except this is strange. I know occasionally I sleepwalk, but he went back to bed. And then when he woke up later in the morning, he noticed these 3 prong marks, which, by the way, I see a lot with clients. And in particular, there's a family in the Fort Collins area whose 4 children have been involved with experiences. And the little boy had this little triangular pinprick mark behind his, I think it was behind his right ear. So I don't know what the nature of it is, except that this had dried blood on it. It was not sore. This appears to be a bruise that was in response to whatever was done to him. And he didn't notice it again until he got up in the morning a couple hours after he'd gone back to bed. So dear Stan has been up to a lot of different things. I just wanted to also say to you that as recently as October 6th, we're at October 11th, just 5 nights ago. Oh, let me back up. I'm sorry, I missed one. I just kind of want to give you an order. October 3rd, 8:35 in the evening, Stan and his wife were on the way back in a car from a long drive across their state. And all of a sudden, he says he notices it's like the lights on his car start to go out, his engine starts to sputter. That goes on intermittently for about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, on the left side of his car, he sees like whirling white lights. He seems to see something metallic to his left. He can't get a beat on it. He and his wife are both hearing some tones in their ears that are bothering them. He didn't have any missing time, at least that I know of. And then he said there was an approaching car that was coming towards them on the opposite side of the road, and when that car approached, whatever was beside him took off, and it was gone, and he never saw how it left. Okay, so that's another incident. And then just 3 nights later, this was amazing, on the night of October 6th, Stan had another what appeared to be abduction, almost identical to the one I told you about, where he found himself out in the backyard at 3 a.m. This particular one, Stan again woke up outside in the middle of the night, completely naked, cold as crazy, couldn't get back in, all the doors locked once again. His wife's window was open a crack because it was still fairly warm in the evening, and he was yelling full force at his wife, "Let me in, open the door, I'm out here, I'm freezing." The poor guy was so cold. He went into the garage and actually got a plastic like garbage bag and made it into pants to put on just because he was so cold. And he was yelling at his wife in the window, and she was not hearing him. It almost seemed as though somehow whatever had happened, that she was switched off in some way. But when he came in, this was the first time to my knowledge he's ever experienced this. His nose was all bloody, and he had a couple of very scratchy marks on either side of his nose. He also had a very strange sort of a crescent scrape mark just behind the front of his teeth on the roof of his mouth. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had any experiences like that or known anyone who's had that type of thing done in their mouth. Also, it appeared that he'd had something done to his reproductive organs, and for his own confidentiality, I won't get into that. But there's way more to this particular last incident than I can ever tell you, and it will come out. And the one thing I can tell you, which will take you right up to the edge of what I can tell you, is that he also happened to record the sound of the UFO that night. I heard it over the phone because he called me. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old Billy Meyer case and the sound of the beam ship that was played. And I know that Bruce Maccabee did a lot of early work, and so did some other researchers on the tones and things. This thing sounded just like that, and he recorded it. But that's not all. There's so much more I can't tell you. Not because I'm trying to be cute, or not because I'm trying to withhold anything, but just because I respect how much someone's comfortable with my sharing publicly about what's happened. But let me say to you this. This is the most remarkable case I have ever seen, and it is very clear that there are others out there, whether it be factions of the government or secret groups, who are very interested in what's happening with Stan. And that's the part that's starting to become more evident now. It was evident back in the early sightings, but it's becoming more evident, and it's really spooky stuff, I'll tell you. But in light of all of that, I just wanted to leave you officially, for the sake of today's video recording, with this last image, and that simply is, through all of this, no matter what you think your troubles are or how important you think things are, you are here. And thank you for coming.
I'm kind of curious about that strange lady. Did Stan make any references to her, or did any information come out about her being some kind of a guardian angel type character or something like that?
That's, he had conscious memory of her, and he didn't feel that. We did do a portion of the hypnotic session where I took him back to the 3 different times where she visited him. He felt very uncomfortable with her. He said there was something very strange about her eyes. The first time he didn't think much about her because he was only 5 or 6 years old and he was playing with his pedal car. The second time, he was maybe about 7 or 8, and it happened when they were Christmas shopping, living up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, of all places. And she approached the car in the middle of the parking lot and said, "My, what a fine son you have." Oh, that's really weird. And he remembered her. And the third time was in a Denver park when he was about 8 or 9 or 10, I think, and he was swinging, and the same woman showed up, and she sat down on a swing beside him and started swinging and said, "You're very important." A lot of other things that she said. And he said with that, and within the session, he was just totally freaked. He got up and he ran home. He remembered within hypnosis that when he was on the swing, he had seen her before, and he felt very uncomfortable with her. My experience of people who have guardian angel visitations is it's completely a different kind of experience than having, an ET type experience. Guardian angel or angel experiences leave people feeling uplifted, lighter, happier, healed, not confused. And he was very troubled by this woman, whoever she was. I guess she was normal enough that she must have blended in without being questioned, but strange enough that he really noticed her. Very thin, whitish blonde hair, big blue eyes. He doesn't remember seeing her hands or anything, dressed in normal clothes. So I don't think it was a guardian angel of sort. Maybe some kind of a guardian. I think we got a couple more minutes here. I don't know.
You said you had a website. Would you give your address?
I do. It's www.cfree, which is CFREE.org. Stands for Center for Extraordinary Explorations, CFREE.org. And there's a lot of all these different topics there, as well as some self-help sections for abductees, and I also do referrals to other therapists. In fact, I know we've got Craig here. If there's anyone in the area that holds support groups or does therapy other than Craig, I like to put them on my referral list because people often email me and say, I need help and I'm in the such and such an area. Who do you have on your database? And so I'll often refer people out if they contact me through the website.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So maybe we could call this good for today. And
thank you. It's really great being with you.